Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be talking about plyometric exercises for athletic performance. So we're going to be talking about what plyometric exercises are, why they can be used in the training and what their purpose is, and then how can we then implement that into our training for athletes. So to start off, we need to understand what plyometrics are. Essentially, plyometrics are exercises which involve the stretch shortening cycle. And these can be basically on a spectrum from quite mild or lower intensity to higher intensity or quite intensive. So the low intensity plyometrics are going to be exercises that have less involvement of the stretch shortening cycle or less reliant on the stretch shortening cycle, whereas very intense plyometrics are going to be heavily reliant on the stretch shortening cycle for good performance. So in this example, we got someone doing just a counter movement box jump, which is going to involve the stretch shortening cycle, but there is it's a slower stretch shortening cycle, and therefore the muscles actually have a lot more time to produce force, so it's going to be more reliant on muscular force and less reliant on the stretch shortening cycle. But in this example of this guy doing a drop jump, it's going to be a very fast contraction, which means they need to quickly overcome a lot of force in the eccentric phase, followed by propelling themselves in the concentric phase. So this is going to be a lot faster and a lot more heavily reliant on the stretch shortening cycle. So why should we use this sort of plyometric training when we're aiming for increasing our athletic performance? Well, the stretch shortening cycle essentially is going to be very important often for different athletic activities that we need to do. So things like running, jumping, and throwing involve the stretch shortening cycle to a significant degree. So in this example of this girl doing a high jump, basically she's going to run up, and as she plants that last foot before she jumps, there is an abrupt stretch shortening cycle that has to take place really quickly so that she can then overcome all that eccentric force and then propel herself over the bar. And the reason that we use plyometrics is because we can train the stretch shortening cycle by using plyometric exercises, which means we can then improve our stretch shortening cycle ability by using plyometrics, which means that we can have greater use of the elastic properties of the muscle tendon complex. So how do we implement plyometrics into our training? So it's important to firstly make clear that a base level of strength and power is required to produce and absorb high forces. So not only do we need a good amount of strength and power in order to actually contract our muscles really quickly and powerfully with a lot of force, but we also need to be able to absorb high forces before we can actually then propel ourselves. Because when we do plyometric activities, there's a really quick eccentric phase, and the stronger we are eccentrically, the more we can absorb those high forces, the quicker we can then convert that into concentric force and power. So when we're implementing plyometrics, we sort of want to have that start off by doing a base level of strength and power and force absorption, and then plyometrics can gradually be introduced, and we can start off with more mild plyometrics, so things with stretch shortening cycle but not a heavy involvement, and we can then move on to very intensive plyometrics if the athlete can tolerate it and if they're at that stage of their training age. So just quickly to touch on some exercise progressions for plyometrics. So this is an example of like a vertical jump progression. So we can start with sort of loaded trap bar deadlift jumps, which are essentially just going to be a concentric only jump. So it's going to be that base power type exercise, followed by something like a counter movement box jump, which is going to have some involvement of the stretch shortening cycle, but it's still going to be very muscular force dominant. We can then move to something like a drop jump, which is going to have quite a heavy involvement of the stretch shortening cycle. And then finally, something like repeated hurdle jumps, where we need to repeatedly absorb and propel ourselves and use that stretch shortening cycle really intensively and continuously. In terms of like an explosive push-up type exercise, we can start with a sort of a dead start explosive push-up, which is equivalent to like that trap bar jump, where we start without any counter movement jump in the bottom position and basically use a concentric only explosive push-up. Then we can do an explosive push-up with a counter movement, followed by similar to a drop jump, but dropping into an explosive push-up. And then we can do again that repeated explosive push-up, similar to the repeated hurdle jump, something like that, where we have a really intensive stretch shortening cycle requirements, and we have to do that continuously. And that's it for this presentation, guys. Hopefully you got something out of it. You can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and on Instagram with the details here. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe on YouTube if you like this informative content and to stay up to date with the latest. On Facebook and Instagram, if you're a curious individual and you're interested in learning about the latest research in athletic performance training, you might enjoy these research infographics, which is essentially the latest research in sports performance training summarized into these easy to understand graphics so that you can stay up to date with the latest research. Thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully you got something out of it.